welcome to this wonderful event. It's another author event that I have scheduled with Gordon Dymowski. He's from Chicago. Stitch is a website that is in 88 countries all over the world. It was set up to prevent and dispel loneliness. It's for people over 50, and I absolutely love hosting events on Stitch. We have large numbers of members in Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. I'm very proud to present Gordon Dymowski, who's a Chicago-based Pulp Factory award-winning writer whose work has been published by Pro Se Productions, Space Boogie Press, Pilot Studios, and Airship 27 Productions. Gordon has also served as panelist, organizer, and presenter for Chicago Doctor Who Meetup, Windy City Pulp and Paper, C2E2, Chicago Nerds Social Club, Chicago TARDIS, and DePaul Pop Culture Celebration. Let's give a warm welcome to Gordon, and we're so happy to have you here, Gordon, to learn from you. You're an event host here on Stitch too, so thank you so much. I'm excited to learn from you myself.
Well, thank you for having me. So as Wendy said, I am a new pulp writer. I even brought some of my books to show you, so feel free to screen capture, and I'm on Amazon order. The Pulp Factory Award story that I won the award for is for a tale in 1950s Western Roundup, and it's called Knights of the Silver Cross. And this anthology takes Old West, desperados of the Old West, and rethinks them as kind of good guys. So there's a story by B. Chris Bell about Jesse James, and my story is about Deacon Jim Miller, who was basically a paid assassin. He went around with a metal breastplate and a cloak and a hat. And in mine, he's kind of like the Green Hornet, only it's he doesn't do villainous stuff, but it's also about the presidential candidates coming into town and a possible assassination attempt. And so besides that, I've also had some nonprofit essays published. So I've had one in Oof Boff Splat, which it's a 3-volume series about the Batman TV show, and I'm in volume 3. And I've also been published in my most recent essay was in Galloping Across the Cosmos, which is about the original Star Trek series. Both are from Becky Books. And then my most recent fiction is actually based on a character created by Conan Doyle. This isn't it because this was published last year, because we all know Sherlock Holmes, and the volume is Sherlock Holmes, A Year of Mystery, 1884. But the volume I'm going to talk about today is the Challenger Chronicles, published by Airship 27, and I don't have my hard copy with me. And the Challenger Chronicles is based on a character that Conan Doyle created in 1911 by the name of, how many of you are familiar with, it's a movie called The Lost World? It's got dinosaurs. It's how Jurassic Park was called the Jurassic Park: The Lost World? Conan Doyle wrote a novel about a group of travelers who head to an island where there are dinosaurs in prehistoric times, and it featured a character named Professor George Challenger, and Challenger is basically he is what you might call the antithesis of Holmes. Holmes is very rational, he's very calm, he's very precise. Challenger will just belligerent and nasty and will just tell you off. And he has his Watson is a journalist named Ned, and I'm blanking on his last name, but a lot of several Challenger works are in the public domain. So Lost World, public domain, anyone can use it. The Poison Belt is a novella, it's a good creepy novella, and that's worth looking into. It is a really good book. And then last year, there's a Challenger novel that went public domain, which is the the Land of Mist, which is not a very good book. So if you've got to read any Challenger, Lost World and Poison Belt. Um, but this anthology is special to me for two reasons. One is I get to play in Conan Doyle's universe, but the other great thing was that I actually helped create the Bible for it. And the way it came about was that I knew the publishers of Airship 27, a gentleman named Ron Fortier and another gentleman named Rob Davis. And if you know Ron, you'd know that for me to call him a gentleman, he would be actually surprised. So I will insist that yes, he is a gentleman. And I proposed it, and Ron said, "Well, Gordon, we need more than just, hey, it's a great idea. Would you do the Bible?" So I read all the Challenger stories. There's the three novels and two short stories which are not in the public domain yet. I think one comes out next year and then one the year after that. Um, and so read the novels and I developed not just to get a sense of the characters, but also here's the situations that you could see them in. So one is basically takeoffs of the Lost World. They go exploring and find stuff. Another is kind of the science fiction-y bent, which my story in Challenger Chronicles kind of focuses on. It's a tale called The Secret History of Renswick Vale. And basically, Challenger, Ned, and some colleagues go into a sleepy English village where once every couple of decades, people get, there's like a near riot. And so it's like, what's going on here? So they investigate that. Um, and there's also three other great short stories. And once I proposed that and sent the Bible out, um, several people signed up almost immediately. In fact, there's a volume two being in process right now where other people are writing it. So the Challenger Chronicles, I'm very proud of because it's not just here's a story that I put out there, but also that I kind of helped create it. In terms of what I'm working on right now, um, I just finished writing another essay for a compilation. This past year, I contributed, and it's from a sort of publisher called ATB Publishing called Outside In Regenerates. And it's a book of essays about classic Doctor Who episodes. And I have an essay there that I wrote years ago. This past year, I finished an essay for a volume they're doing on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Um, I'm also working on a couple of fiction short stories. And I'm hoping that I've got a couple of longer form, like novels and novellas, that should be coming out within the next few months. Um, but basically, kind of what I do when I'm writing a story is I try to think of I try to meld like a really strong idea, like a strong idea for a plot, but I also try to pepper it with characters and dialogue. Because for me, a great story doesn't, when I'm writing a good story, I'm in the zone where as I'm typing, I want to know what happens next, and I'm the guy writing it. So I also try to be as just kind of down to earth and as emotionally engaging, which is why I prefer pulp, because with pulp, you can it's very sparse prose. I don't write, I don't write large um I'm not Stephen King. I don't write books big enough where you can use it to stop a door as really big paperweights. Um, but I also try to be entertaining and as clever as I can. And to me, it's, the biggest compliment anyone can ever pay to me is not, oh, you're a great writer, but oh, I read your story. It's pretty good. Um, and so with that, I'm not sure what else. What I'd like to do is open it up to questions because I know you're kind of getting a very small sliver of what I do. But I'm also always willing to talk about writing and the art of writing and um, see if there's anything that I can do to kind of, give you insight. Now, I'm here because, I'm, as Wendy said, I'm also on Stitch, and it would be nice it's been a while since I've interacted. So, please feel free. If you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Well, I just learned tonight that you have a master's degree in counseling from Loyola, which is a major university
Hmm.
in the Chicago area, and I'm very impressed. I know there's a lot more to learn. I want to know how much you do you write every day? Do you have a regular writing routine? And I
I when I can, I try to factor in some writing every day. Sometimes it's fiction, sometimes it's journaling. And because my day job, I'm also a digital marketing consultant and copywriter. Yeah, I try
oh,
to carve out time specifically for fiction writing because otherwise I'm just at a keyboard all day. And it's easy. Copywriting is a much different kind of mindset than fiction because with copywriting, it usually involves keywords. It usually involves getting a certain tone and a certain voice, but it's also something that the client wants. Whereas in fiction, it's like I can just let my brain go, let go and let the story kind of kick in and focus on that as well.
that's awesome. Do we have other people with questions?
Uh, I do. I
Mhm.
have written a lot of short stories and poems and memoirs. Uh, and I also was a writer. I did a lot of, I was a fundraiser, head of a fundraising department, and none of my staff could write, so I had to do all the writing. So I wrote, grants, I wrote marketing materials, journals, huge, thick journals for fundraising with people's biographies, interviews, newsletters, everything else. I found that kind of writing much easier. I found the hardest thing I'm doing, taking a class now in fiction, is to invent a character. The teacher asked us to take two people we knew and combine their personalities. I couldn't do it because usually the characters that I write about are based on one real person that I knew. But to integrate two people together, I didn't know what I did. It didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the things that, it's probably a little easier for me because as Wendy said, since I come from a counseling background, it's easy for me to think like, okay, I'm going to have a character who looks like person A in my life, but I'm going to give them person B's sarcastic sense of humor rather than this person's general sense of humor. So it's probably a little, and in my head as I'm writing, I might even do that where I might think, okay, this is what the character looks like, but okay, how would this friend say this? And put that in. And this
Lord,
friend says this. And nonfiction is also a challenge to write because it's
I don't have
uh,
any problem with that.
yeah,
Well,
and some people don't.
no.
But for me, it's a different challenge because it's very fact based, and I have to. Um, in fact, in writing this essay for DS9, my Doctor Who essay for the publisher was very humorous because the story is humorous. Um, the episode in DS9 is a two-parter known as the McKee, which sets up Voyager, it sets up future conflicts, and it's not a laugh, it's not a funny episode, it's a very serious episode. And my essay reflected that. And my editor Stacy, as soon as I submitted the draft, came back and said, "Well, Gordon, there's two issues. First, it's a very straightforward telling of the episode. You're not really getting to the point. And secondly, you need more jokes." Now, the first part I could understand because it's okay, fair enough. And it's like, okay, so I went back and I did the rewrite and, I kind of made, um, I made, I kind of, I felt like the essay, I mean, the essay was, different. Um, but I wanted to make sure I made the point without, but I made some gratuitous jokes like, you know, Federation historians are always arguing whether Kirk cheated on the Kobayashi Maru or changed the conditions of the test and things like that. So nonfiction, like for me, it's challenging, but it's a different kind of challenge. And I'm
I
always
get it.
glad to hear that, when it's easy for people, it's like, I hear you and I envy you.
Yeah, but well, could it be because I really don't like reading fiction. I
That
used
could
to,
be.
but when I read fiction, I feel like, I don't know, I'm not learning anything from this. I like to read books about um, astronomy or books about psychology,
Hmm.
Jung, Viktor Frankl. I like to read books about different spiritual belief systems, the history of the Jews. But for some reason, I used to love reading fiction. I just go, as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, why am I bothering to read something that's not true?
Well, for me, it's about sparking the imagination because it's like with fiction, and I've also shifted more towards audiobooks because that way I can sit and actually listen and take it in, and also
Oh,
hear the dialogue. But yeah, with fiction, like especially after the going through the time I did last year, I needed that escape, and I
yeah, I
needed
understand.
just to be like, okay, I don't have to deal with the stress in the modern world. I can deal with somebody else. It's um,
Hmm.
I think we all want to escape, and it's um, when I
I
write,
used to feel,
yeah, my when I'm writing, I always think of a quote that Alfred Hitchcock once said. He said, "Some films are slices of life, mine are slices of cake."
Don't you think that I'm very impressed by what you said about um I don't you think that it's easier to write characters and create characters when you do have a counseling background?
See,
Because you can see things from so many different points of view. You have that um training. Don't you think that that's true?
it may be. It sounds something I've really thought about because when you look at writers, I think you need a certain amount of like understanding of people.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been a while since I've actually been a counselor. While I'm working as a digital marketing consultant now. And so, but I think
Mhm.
understanding the psychology is always critical, but it's like I think if somebody were to take, maybe an online course or two in psychology and personality to understand, that I think is also helpful because it's understanding that, even in something as simple as pulp, where, you're dealing with people in extraordinary circumstances, you still have to have that basis in realistic behavior in that, it's the um what you always want to avoid is, you know, how if you're watching a movie at home and someone's going to do a stupid thing, you go, don't do that, don't open the door, don't go there. You want to at least have that basic understanding. I think, reading books on psychology and personality can help. Um, I just happen to read a lot more of them back from my training, but I do think having an understanding of people makes you a better writer.
Absolutely.
Lori, I know that you write. You have an interest in science fiction, right? If I remember correctly. So you must have a question. You're muted. You're muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Maybe more on your point of developing a specific character. Do you sit down and, write a brief biography of them of how do you develop a specific character with a specific voice? What is your process in that? Do you sit down and kind of map something out beforehand, or you just kind of start talking and then develop the backstory afterwards? How do you do that?
Well, with characters, what I usually do, it's not, I know some writers do a full dossier. I usually just do a couple of bullet points and just some understanding of who is this person. So, one of the short stories in a book that is no longer in print called Dreamer Syndrome: New World Navigation. Um, the premise, it's a world where everyone wakes up one day and dressed as the job they wanted when they were 10 years old. My character wanted to be a detective, a hard-boiled detective. Um, my initial idea was someone who wanted to be Sherlock Holmes. Well, it didn't quite work fitting the guidelines of the story, but the character I realized, okay, if he's going to be a hard-boiled detective, why would you want to be a hard-boiled detective at 10 years old? That suggested, okay, he was familiar with Hammett, Chandler, etc. So he was reading a lot of um, he was reading a lot of pulps from probably his grandfather because it took place in the early 2000s. Um, the setting was Los Angeles, so okay, he's a screenwriter, but he's a failed screenwriter because he could, he did some script doctoring and stuff like that, but he wasn't into it. He was a Midwestern boy. Um, he in his investigation, he needs to, he's a kind of a sensitive, kind of very um, you know, there's a hint of like emotional and verbal abuse. So he's trying to be this tough guy. So it's figuring out, okay, in this story, who is this person, and seeing how those traits come out. And so for me, it's less kind of doing the, okay, this is what he has for breakfast, this is where, but it's kind of having those ideas of this is where he's from, and just doing like quick little, it's literally lines on a legal pad. And that kind of helps me going in. So I know this is who I'm writing about. Um, with a character like Challenger, there is enough from the past stories where I kind of had to balance it out because Challenger is not a very pleasant character. Like he is literally, you know, Holmes, Sherlock Holmes kind of puts you down by being smarter than you are. Challenger um, proves, expresses intelligence by saying, well, why wouldn't you know this? And words, very condescending, very, so I had to take that out of it. And I kind of made Ned, who in the Lost World, he goes on this trip because his fiance is saying, uh, you're too boring. I want a life of adventure. He has a life of adventure. And spoiler alert, when he comes back, his fiance is like, well, you know what? I realized I wanted boring and she's marrying somebody else. So I gave him a little bit more of that spark of that excitement. Um, Lost World is still worth reading, by the way, as well as The Poison Belt. But it's thinking of, and also in terms of kind of writing diverse characters. One of the things I have a pretty large friend group with different kinds of people. Sometimes it means I actually have to do the research and not just ask like not just ask like a friend, not just asking your friend, well, what is this cultural experience for you? But being able to do the research and um, being able to express that, it's not always easy, but I find that the more that I can bring some of that into my writing, that getting an idea of who this person is, but also in terms of someone who is not me, what their experience might be like is always a challenge.
Do you find that most of your characters are little facets of you?
In many ways, yeah. But it's more like, oh, okay, I can identify with this aspect rather than, okay, here's just me with a different name.
I think maybe it was another author that Wendy had brought in, suggested that she actually interviews. She does a fake, process in her mind of interviewing the character so that she can get their reactions and their mannerisms and stuff like that down. And I thought that was a great suggestion too.
Yeah, I mean it's whatever works for the writer. I mean, I know a lot of like I know several of my colleagues, and I know I'll get a lot of flack once this video comes out. We'll say like, oh, I write so many words a day, and you absolutely must do this. And it's like, it's figuring out your style and figuring out what your technique is. I mean, I wish I could put everything I can in a box and sell it, but the problem is what I do works for me. It's not going to necessarily work for you. So finding that process is always critical, and it's never easy, and it's not a do this, this, and this, and bingo, there's your style. It's the way you learn the way I learned it is through writing. I mean, for years I wrote for fanzines and I wrote for a website called Comic Related about media, and a lot of that taught me how to put together a piece. Um, and with short stories, I wrote short stories in college, but now that I'm a little older and I started formally writing in my 30s and 40s, there's a maturity and an understanding that you have that you don't necessarily understand at your 20s. Like in my 20s, probably, yeah, every character would have been me with a nickname. Now it's just me. It's just, okay, I can see myself in there, but the character is a little bit more, they're not so much children as like, okay, I can see where, yeah, that's actually kind of that's an interesting thing I did. Or, yeah, there's a really, or like, I want to visit these characters more often.
Do you have any particular tricks that you have to make a story compelling? I noticed that when I read, if they haven't got me by the first chapter, I'm ready to put the book down. That kind of hook. And I read somewhere that you need some kind of a crisis, that you've got your character and your situation, but then you need some kind of crisis that they need to overcome, and that helps being compelling. Is there anything that you think about in your own mind to try to make something more compelling, to get that hook in near the beginning?
Yeah, well, I'm reminded of a story, and I don't remember where I heard it, but basically, a writer had written this great book, and they spent like 2 or 3 chapters on world building, and the plot started in the middle of chapter 4. And so the editor goes through, reads the first 3 chapters, points to the middle of the of chapter 4 and says, "Start there.
Yeah.
Rewrite the book. Start there." What I like to do is I like to start with either a line of with 2 things, and one is a must, one is a maybe. I like to start in the middle of a scene, so and kind of work my way back. So I wrote a story called Sins of the Father in an anthology called The Case of the Defective Detective. Um, and it's a Chicago police officer in the 1990s is going to he's knocking on the door, and a consultant opens and lets him in. Now, these are and we establish in the background that the consultant is a diabetic who's suffering from neuropathy and was in a bad car accident, so he can't really walk around. The 2 detectives, the consultant is a dry drunk, and the police detective is a recovering alcoholic. And it's also about a murder where, okay, there's a young guy he's showing off his dad's gun collection. They're playing Russian roulette, and he's like, okay, look, no bullet, no bullet. Puts one in, twirls it, puts it to his head, and he shoots himself. However, that was a story that I learned in grad school. We're talking about IQ and intelligence, and there's a twist. But you don't see the murder. You hear about the murder, but it's the idea that, okay, you need to, rather than, okay, there's all this stuff that happened, story. You start in the story, and then you have the reader play catch up.
Do you
Yeah,
get,
And then the other piece is try if I can start with a strong line of dialogue and still do the same thing, in the middle of the story, that's always great.
do you often get surprised with what happens on the page that you didn't expect?
Oh, frequently.
I think that's the best part of writing, when that happens.
Hmm. And it's also good too, because with those twists and turns, it keeps the story, at least for me, it keeps the story from getting stale. It never feels like, oh, okay, I'm gonna. It's like with some movies, you can tell you know how you can predict what's going to happen because you know the screenplay is that bad. I always want to avoid that in my writing. If I use a trope, it's one thing, but I want it to be part of the story. I don't want it to be, okay, I'm stuck. What do I do? I think Raymond Chandler said, when you're stuck, have a man come in armed with a gun, which works in hardboiled detective fiction, but maybe not in, say, a Western or Sherlock Holmes or anything like that. So it's figuring out when those curves come, following those curves, because those curves make your story a lot more interesting.
Haven't heard from you, Donna. Do you have a question?
It's very interesting. I've done writing too, I like poetry and stuff like that.
Mhm.
That just wondering, did you always want to be a writer?
Yeah. I remember when I was in third grade, I wrote a story about, I think it was called like the mystery of the haunted house. And it turns out there are weird noises, person heads in, and it turns out to be a dog howling. So I knew I wanted to be a writer, but part of it's okay actually being a writer. It was very low paying, and in college I'd written some short stories and got a lot of rejection slips. So I went into counseling thinking, okay, well, at least there, if I'm writing clinical reports, I'm writing. And then after writing for a comic related website, I met some small publishers, and that kind of took me in a much that kind of got me to doing the actual fiction part. So yeah, I'd always wanted to be a writer.
Do you ever like pick a moral of the story or something like that you want to try to weave into the storyline of some, your take home message that you want the reader to have at the end? Do you ever do that? Do you do it beforehand or in the middle?
Usually when it comes to themes, like my personal belief is that like themes and morals always subconscious rather than conscious. So if I were to write a story with the assumption that crime does not pay, it's going to be questionable because I'm deliberately writing towards that point. But if I just have an idea and I'm writing for it, and it's like, oh, that's the theme. Um, like the Sherlock Holmes story that I wrote is called The Web of Duplicity. So you think, okay, web, and I'm writing the story and it's about a blackmail ring. And I'm getting to the end and the blackmail's revealed, and I just realize, okay, who's this guy working for? Well, web of duplicity, web of the thousand radiations, it's Moriarty. Now, this isn't like Holmes' third year of practice. This is like Holmes and Watson's third year together. So I can't say, hey, Moriarty's the enemy. But what I could do is it's like, okay, well, I could have Holmes talk about, okay, there's a quote like, hey, the guy I work for thinks of life as like a math problem. And so that necessitated, before I submitted it, rewriting it because I wanted to layer in some clues about, there's something about Holmes with a case in college that didn't that there really wasn't much to it, but he got Moriarty's attention. Um, that's something I discovered in the writing of it. But would I ever go and think, okay, I need to write about modern, when I write Westerns, I always write politics, but I write 19th century politics because it's like one is about the gold standard, another is about you know, another is kind of about like Knights of the Silver Cross is about the gold standard and silver standard. And it's so I never knowingly go into thinking I'm going to write about this important theme or layer in this message. It comes to me as I'm writing it, if that makes sense.
That's awesome.
So any other questions? I figured what I'd end with my secret weapon, with what I actually write with. I often use pen and paper, but when I really want to carve something out, I use this laptop. It's a ThinkPad T420, which was released about 13 years ago. One of my hobbies is Linux computing and computer rehab. So when I bought this, there was no optical drive, no hard drive, no charger, and the battery was at 30%. And I bought this for about $20 on eBay for charity. And you're probably thinking, okay, well, why is this so special? I want to show you this keyboard. If you can all see, it is the best keyboard I can ever write on. It keeps the processor is, you can run software on it, but like not Skype, not, I don't have social media. Linux is very easy. It's very slim to use. And see right there, there's actually a switch to turn off Wi-Fi. So
Oh,
I can write distraction free. But it's also a way for me because I put in a hard drive. I got a 9-cell battery, so it lasts for hours. Got a new charger. I got the optical disc. I got a caddy where I can stick in another SSD if I want to. But what matters isn't that you don't need a special laptop. This one I like because it's separate from work, so I don't need to worry about all that other stuff. It doesn't matter what I write on because I've done pencil and paper when I'm stuck. It's just about getting the story out, and then it's the rewriting and getting it edited and moving forward in that process.
well, thank you so very much, Gordon, for coming and agreeing to do this event. It's
Thank
been
you.
a joy to learn from you, and I'm very impressed the more I learn about you. And we're so blessed to have you as an event host on Stitch and to learn from you and about your writing. We hope to hear more. So thank you so
This is
very
good.
much for
Thank you
coming
for
today.
having me.
I'm very impressed. Thank you so
Mhm.
very much for coming in today.
Thank you. And
And
thank